Zion Williamson is out for Friday's game against the Sacramento Kings. It's a brutal blow, but I'll tell you why the Kings are still worried. We've got Sacramento's perspective in a crossover episode of Locked On Pelicans and Locked On Kings. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to a crossover edition of Locked On Pelicans, Locked On Kings. I'm the Locked On Pelicans host, Jake Madison, at Nola Jake on Twitter. He's Matt George, host of Locked On Kings, at Matt George, SAC, sack there. Matt, sixth time, buddy, that we're doing this here.
Six times a charm, huh? Six times a charm for Sacramento. That's what we're hoping for at this point, man. 5 games against the same team in the regular season and getting rinsed in all 5 games, basically. It makes sense for the Kings to go from exercising their Warriors demon to now trying to get this new demon out of their way in the New Orleans Pelicans. So I still expect a good game.
No, look, and the game is going to be different given the news we just got about Zion Williamson. So we'll get into that in a second here. But of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans, Locked On Kings your first listen today, every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the daily podcast covering everything you want to know about these two teams. We do crossovers as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Become an everydayer. Whether you're a Kings fan, a Pelicans fan, listen to the channel Monday through Friday. That's what everydayers do. Subscribe wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube as well. So going into this, say 2 days ago, I would have felt pretty confident for the New Orleans Pelicans. And to be honest, I still feel pretty confident for the New Orleans Pelicans. But there's a big game changer here, and that was the Zion Williamson injury suffered late in that loss to the Los Angeles Lakers. He is now officially ruled out for Friday with a left hamstring injury. Zion's averaged 23 points per game, 6 assists, 4.5 rebounds in 4 of the 5 games that they've played. It's obviously a massive game changer, right?
Yeah, 2 things that come to mind when I read this information. Number one is it's a big boost for Sacramento. But
absolutely.
It's nothing worth celebrating, right? Like, you want to be the team at their best. The Kings are also coming into New Orleans minus a starter in Kevin Huerter, but the big thing is minus who I believe is going to be the 6th man of the year in Malik Monk. So both these teams are missing some really, really key pieces, and Zion was playing so well. Jake, you and I were talking about before we started recording here, the Kings crowd in the Golden One Center was watching the Pelicans-Lakers game before the Kings Warriors game started, and everybody in Sacramento was rooting for the Pelicans to win, not just because we like you guys more than the Lakers, but because Kings fans, Sacramento, the way this season has gone, want nothing to do with the Pelicans. If we could avoid y'all for the rest of the season, that would have been perfect. And when Zion went down with that injury, I thought the Lakers were completely on the ropes. And I mean, he had 40-point performance. I thought, wow, the Pelicans are going to pull this comeback off and give the Kings a chance to beat the Lakers one more time. So brutal in that sense. That's the first thing I thought of. Second thing I thought of is this is not the first time, Jake, that the Kings have faced the Pelicans without Zion. And the
Correct.
Kings got absolutely destroyed when the Pelicans played the Kings without Zion. So this is by no means a Kings got it now, because we've seen this before. And we talk about exercising demons, not just exercising the demon of the Pelicans that are 5-0 against the Kings this season. Sacramento has had an issue all year long with not taking advantage when playing shorthanded teams. So in many ways, the Kings have an opportunity to kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone with a victory in New Orleans.
Look, it's poetic that it comes down to like an elimination game like this, right? And that's the important thing and some of the things that you want to see with it all. So hopefully they'll be able to, it'll be a competitive game, I think. But you mentioned that game where New Orleans did win. It was back on January 7th. They didn't have Zion Williamson in that one. It was a 33-point win. So I don't think this is one of those things where Pelicans fans are probably kind of going into this feeling pretty deflated and just assuming season's over. But that's definitely not going to be the case here. And in that game, you had a very good performance from CJ McCollum. You had a lot of bench points in that game. Dyson Daniels, Najee Marshall, Jordan Hawkins. Let's look at it kind of in the big picture, taking into account the Zion Williamson thing. What's been the problem for the Kings kind of getting over some of the hump for the Pelicans and why they struggle in this game, in this series?
Well, it changed a lot actually over the course of the season. What I think naturally the Pelicans have in abundance that gives the Kings problems is length and athleticism on the wing. Like Sacramento just does not have enough bodies to counter that. Now, Keegan Murray played a hell of a game, scored 32 points against the Warriors. Harrison Barnes,
he was great.
So the Kings do have wing talent, but their depth at that position has always been lacking. Mike Brown is pretty much running an 8-man rotation right now, and the 3 guys off the bench is a guard, a forward center combo, and then a true center in Alex Len. So the Kings, like Keegan and Harrison, is pretty much the depth that they have at the wing. And that's naturally, given the Kings' troubles, any team with good wing depth and length and physicality on the wing has really, Sacramento's really struggled against this season. That being said, the Kings right now, and this is what I think caught the Warriors by surprise the other night, the Kings are playing with much more of a physicality and intensity on the defensive end of the floor that we have not really seen before. This group is enjoying playing that way. So the physicality that the Pelicans brought to the matchups early in the season, Sacramento was not ready for. Now they are ready for it. But what the Kings aren't ready for is this Pelicans shooting that just does not freaking miss when they play Sacramento. McCollum has looked like an absolute Hall of Famer every single time he's played the Kings. Brandon Ingram is naturally a Kings killer just based off of the type of player that he is. There are so many pieces. I mean, even Jose Alvarado torched the Kings with big 3 after big 3 in Sacramento a couple of weeks ago. So this Pelicans roster is just loaded with shooters, and the Kings defense was really held back by their perimeter defense and their 3-point defense. If Sacramento had like a league average 3-point defense, they would have been absolutely a top 10 defense in the league, which is crazy to talk about for Sacramento. But their 3-point defense was so bad that the Kings were, for the most part, in the bottom half of the league defensively. So just there's so many things that the Pelicans do that present problems for the Kings, and Sacramento is going to need to play a near perfect game, in my opinion, to be able to defeat them even without Zion.
Yeah, you mentioned Brandon Ingram, and he really struggled against the Los Angeles Lakers in the 2 games that they just played against them, the final game of the regular season and then this play-in tournament game. But against the Kings so far this year, he's averaging 25 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists in 4 games. CJ McCollum is averaging 26 points, 6 assists, 4 rebounds in there. So there's still plenty of firepower, and if New Orleans wants to win this, like, those guys need to step up. They were flat out bad. They were bad on Tuesday night against the Lakers, but there's some historic success here, especially this season. You know, you've seen a lot of Harrison Barnes guarding Zion Williamson. I'm assuming the Pelicans are going to start Trey Murphy in the place. Is that going to kind of influence things? Does that allow Harrison Barnes to then cover somebody else? What do you expect kind of from him? Because that, to me, and we'll get more into kind of X factors a little bit later in the show, but how they maybe shift coverages a little bit, I think is going to be interesting in this one.
Yeah, Harrison is such a Swiss Army knife for Sacramento, to where he's got the capability of having big performances, but really he is a filler. He is and I don't mean that in a disrespectful way towards him, but like there's so much emphasis on getting the matchup that the Kings want for Keegan Murray on the defensive end, getting the matchup that the Kings want for like a Keon Ellis on the defensive end, or even De'Aaron Fox on the defensive end. That it's like, okay, whichever wing is left over, Harrison, that's kind of your guy. Now, Harrison had, I thought, a pretty overall solid defensive performance against Golden State the other night, even though he was never like the defender taking on the marquee guy. He was solid, he was steady, he was consistent, he was everything you want out of that position. So to me, like this Kings physical defense is really defense by committee. If who's going to be on Brandon Ingram, it's going to be Keegan Murray. Who's going to be trying to handle CJ McCollum? It's going to be Keon Ellis or De'Aaron Fox, and kind of a combo of those 2 guys. So really, those are the main 3 defensively that the Kings are going to hunt specific matchups for. Everybody else is like, okay, put a body on everybody else, help when needed, and just play your role, right? And that was what I felt Harrison's job. That's what I felt Harrison was doing, even guarding Zion, was just, hey, be physical, be a steady presence, fill your role, and make sure Domantas Sabonis doesn't get into foul trouble.
Yeah, no, and look, there's also Jonas Valanciunas who kind of takes that matchup with Sabonis really personally and really likes to go at him and stick it to him and all of that. So despite not having Zion Williamson, I think New Orleans probably goes into this maybe without momentum, but with a lot of confidence given how some of these other guys have played. Let's get a little bit more into the Kings coming up here in the next segment, talk about how they can win this game, what to expect from them as we get set for a winner-go-home play-in game here. So that's coming up here next in a crossover episode of Locked On Pelicans and Locked On Kings. Right now, though, I'm excited to tell you about Monopoly Go. We've all been there, either as a fan or a player. It's halftime. The scoreboard's not looking good. You're feeling low, and you're not sure how you or your team can pull out a win. And that's when you dig deep, lift your head up, say to yourself, time to get back in the game and pull off some bank heists and take as much of my friends' money as I possibly can. That's right. The smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go lets you compete with your friends to get the most riches and the biggest empire. It's the Monopoly you love, but on your phone, anytime, with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies. There's so much to do. You can play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards, make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball, and charge other players rent on your iconic properties. You can even work with your friends to crack open community chests in tournaments to get extra rewards and climb the leaderboard. So get back out there, put your game face on, and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. And of course, thank you for joining us for a crossover episode of Locked On Pelicans. I'm Jake Madison, host of that show. He is Matt George, host of Locked On Kings. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can only get stuff like this on the Locked On Network, where we get crossovers, giving you the insight like this. And we are talking about the play-in tournament game between the New Orleans Pelicans and Sacramento Kings. So Matt, let me ask you this simple question. You know, again, they're 0-5 against the Pelicans this season. I think it's tough to beat a team 6 times, more or less in the regular season, which is kind of what this is like. How do the Kings win this one?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, you said coming out of the last segment, you mentioned momentum. And I think that's a really important word here because, I mean, speaking from the perspective of someone on the outside of New Orleans looking in, 2 games that have just plummeted New Orleans down the standings from 6th seed and feeling really good about a guaranteed playoff spot to now 1 win away from the 8th seed and 1 loss away from being out completely. Like this could be a brutal week for New Orleans, not to try and rub any salt in the wound. Meanwhile, Sacramento, they had a rough end of the season, Jake. Like it was not good. Their worst stretch overall of the season came down the stretch when they lost Malik and had some really, really tough matchups. That being said, this win over Golden State has really put some wind in the sails. The Kings played close to as complete of a game as they could given the circumstances. So I think the Kings are feeling very, very good about themselves, and the way that they played, being in attack mode really from the get-go of the first quarter and the third quarter against Golden State. I expect them to carry that or try to carry that into this game against New Orleans, to where Sacramento has actually done a pretty good job on the road over these past 2 seasons at creating their own energy. They don't necessarily have a crowd to rely on, so they're going to create that own energy internally. Now, a guy who did a lot of that for them is no longer available, which is Malik Monk. So to me, a key to Sacramento's victory, other than limiting the 3-point shot of the New Orleans Pelicans, because they shot 40% in the first loss to the Lakers, the blowout loss. They shot 30% the other night in the loss to the Lakers. So you don't have to shut them down completely. Just limit them as much as possible from the perimeter. That puts you in a good place. But just being in attack mode on both ends of the floor from the jump, not taking too long to settle into the game, and not allowing Pelicans players, whether it's Ingram or McCollum or any of them, to get comfortable. That's what I think is key. Now, if those guys have big nights anyway, tip your cap. They have your number. They've had your number all season. 6-0 against a team, or 0-6 against a team absolutely sucks, and you go into the offseason and figure some things out. But don't let them get comfortable. Don't let them settle in. Don't let the Pelicans get that kind of let's do it for Zion energy. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Well, it's, they're going to try and rally around this, right? Like, this is something that they're going to come together and say, like, no one, it's the no one believes in us thing. And they can kind of bring a group pretty close together. You're kind of facing that adversity with your back to a wall. And it feels like that, right? Like, I can tell you the general feeling of Pelicans fans and people I've talked to is like, the season's done, right? Like, why even do this crossover because they're going to lose kind of thing. But it's really not that. And the players aren't going to approach it that way, right? Like, there's still another game left to go and they want to get into the postseason. So yeah, I think they're going to come out with the right kind of energy and not be completely deflated because of this news.
Yeah, I expect that wholeheartedly. Even with the Zion injury, I genuinely think that the Pelicans themselves, Pelicans fans should have all the confidence in the world. Just how well they have matched up against Sacramento this season. I know it's hard to beat a team 6 times. It's also hard to beat a team 5 times. And
yeah,
y'all didn't have much problem doing that in a big game in Sacramento, right? That game that the Kings were trying to defeat the Pelicans towards the end of the season, even without Malik and even without Kevin, like, that was a big game for the Kings, in many ways a must-win game for the Kings, and they couldn't get the job done. And the Pelicans were missing Brandon Ingram during that game. And there are times where I have genuinely felt like, not to pit one against the other, but I think the Kings are more afraid and more concerned about a player like Ingram than they are a Zion, truth be told. So I think Pelicans fans should have all the confidence in the world that the Pelicans are going to win this game. They definitely shouldn't take the Kings lightly. The Kings are going to continue to give it everything they got, which is hopefully going to be enough. But I haven't looked at the line yet. I have no idea what it is.
I was just trying to like look it up and see if we could find it out right now.
They should absolutely be favorites. Like, I would be stunned if the Pelicans aren't favorites in this game. And the Kings are going to have to play a really, really, really strong game in order to defeat New Orleans and end their season. So I don't think I understand the doom and gloom because we've experienced it in different stretches over our Kings history, even this season. But season's far from over from New Orleans, and they have more than a great shot at keeping their season going.
Yeah, per FanDuel, it's actually -1.5 for the Sacramento Kings. So the Kings are favored going into this game. But I think, it speaks to wild. This series and how interesting it is, right? A guy like De'Aaron Fox has historically had a lot of success against New Orleans. He's really lit up this team. But in one of the games, we saw him maybe play one of his worst games as a pro. I think he was 1 of 10 from the field for just 3 points. That's something when you see those type of performances, right? That as a Kings fan, yeah, would make me kind of worried with something like that. That does this Pelicans team just have the answers here? And I think Pelicans fans are going to be encouraged hearing you say more worried about Brandon Ingram than Zion Williamson. It just comes down to which version of Brandon Ingram, shows up in this game. You talked a lot about Kevin Huerter and Malik Monk, because I agree with you that Monk is probably going to win Sixth Man of the Year. Kevin Huerter was really important for you guys too. How have they dealt with that those 2 injuries and kind of overcome some of that? What impressed you with them also in that win over the Golden State Warriors?
Well, the thing that, and I'm not necessarily saying that because of the Huerter and Monk injuries, the Kings are able to do this, because I think they could have worked it out, and they better find a way to work it out with Monk still hopefully being here long term. But one thing that the Kings have figured out that the Warriors were not prepared for, that the Pelicans have faced and defeated already, is these 3-guard lineups. Mike Brown has found a way to be able to stagger his guard rotations of a De'Aaron Fox, a Davion Mitchell, a Keon Ellis, and even when Malik was still playing, like a Malik Monk, these guys on the floor at the same time. In years past and early parts of the season, it was very much one versus the other, right? So it was either Keon Ellis or Davion Mitchell. You were never getting the best out of both as pesky on-ball defenders that also have some upside to their offensive game. You were never getting both and giving them consistent minutes to showcase both, because one had to play over the other, because you had your set rotation and set minutes for Fox and Huerter and Monk, and you weren't really necessarily going to touch that. These 3-guard lineups have brought the best out of Sacramento with how they can play perimeter defense and with the defensive physicality, because it's really those guards that set that tone. So I'm not saying that the Huerter and Monk injuries have allowed the Kings to discover this, because I think Mike was onto it before the injuries happened, but now he kind of has to go all in on it, because he's missing 2, not just valuable guards, he's missing 2 massive scoring threats, and he's having to replace that with defenders who are shooting well from 3-point range, and then asking more of Murray and Fox and Sabonis and everybody else to pick up some of that scoring load.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, right? And you mentioned the Pelicans, like size and athleticism, maybe can keep up with some of those guard lineups, I think. And you're going to see Trey Murphy starting in place for Zion Williamson in this one. Guy's 6'10" essentially and has very good athleticism and very good length here. And maybe that's going to kind of be one of those things that can end up being a bit of a difference maker either way for all of this. You know, how have the Kings been on the road? You said they've gone out and done pretty well with this. New Orleans has not been a good home team this season, and that's something that I think concerns a lot of Pelicans fans. How do you feel about them coming into this environment here for everything?
Yeah, the Kings were a better road team last season than they were a home team, and that seemed like it was carrying.
It's so weird, right?
It's very strange. It's very strange. And the first half of this season, the Kings on the road were actually again, I would say like I trusted them more on the road than I did at home. However, second half of the season and you look in the final standings, the Kings home record is better than the road record. So that's kind of changed a little bit, but the Kings can, the thing about the Kings, it feels so coin flippy. They can beat anybody on any given night in any location, which makes the play-in tournament both tremendously exciting because it's just one game and also absolutely terrifying because if they lay an egg, they're done. They're out, yeah. Right? And we can say the same thing about the Pelicans. That's the joy and blessings and curses of these single elimination games. But Sacramento is not going. I don't expect them to look different or play different or act any different because this game is on the road versus at home. That being said, though, I'm curious to kind of turn that back around with you. What is it about the Pelicans at home that has really been different or where they've been struggling or what has that been?
It makes no sense. Like, honestly, it's not anything that people have an answer for. We've talked to the players about it and they just go like, you know, sometimes you just miss a shot or two and it kind of swings a game, right? And it's one of those things, you know, against the Lakers, right? If Larry Nance Jr. grabs a rebound that he had position for over Anthony Davis, they probably win that game. And we're not even in this sort of conversation. And you can boil it down sometimes to one or two individual plays like that. I don't know whether it's the mindset or whatever it is, but there's something. Maybe they're just too comfortable at home, sleeping in their own beds the night before, rather than kind of the more stricter routine of being on the road. I have no idea, but it's not something that gives me a lot of like hope in this one. Like, I feel almost better if they were on the road and potentially playing in Sacramento, kind of given everything. But at the same point, then you hope it would just even out eventually. And maybe it's this game when it comes down to something like that, because it's really weird that they are basically 500 at home and have the most road wins they have more road wins in the NBA than the Celtics do, right? Like, that really says something there, but it's just weird that they can't get it done on the home court advantage with everything. So coming up next, let's look at some of the more individual matchups, some X factors for this game, how each team can win. That's coming up here in a crossover episode of Locked On Pelicans and Locked On Kings. Right now, though, I'm excited to tell you about FanDuel because it's playoff time in the NBA and the NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose on FanDuel. So bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. We talked about it, right? The Kings, 1.5-point favorites over the Pelicans. If the Pelicans are struggling at home, maybe it's better to take the -1.5, or if you believe in Brandon Ingram, CJ McCollum, get in on their player props, but then take the points in this one. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. Again, that's $150 in bonus bets. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook and the official sportsbook of Locked On. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans, Locked On Kings your first listen today and every day. Become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to your favorite team's show here. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Matt, we were talking about this before we started recording here. You might be in New Orleans. You have a restaurant you're looking to eat at or anything like that?
It'll be my first time going to New Orleans.
Okay.
So it's not confirmed yet. Still waiting for the details, but I want to go so bad now. It's funny. I was talking to there's an arena worker in the Golden One Center in Sacramento. I was talking to her last night because she's from New Orleans. So she was telling me all these things to do and all these things to check out. She talked about a restaurant called the Blue Crab to go and check out. She talked about just different things. But I will say, and this might make me a bad guy even more to your audience, I'm not really a seafood guy. Like
That's okay.
I'm not a big fan of seafood. That being said, I'm told like you try seafood in New Orleans, it'll change your mind. So if I go to New Orleans, I'm going with an open mind, but I've been told the city is absolutely amazing. I'd love to visit. And hopefully my employer lets me get that chance.
my listeners will have plenty of recommendations here for you. If you're a Locked On Pelicans listener and you're watching it on the YouTube page, go over to the Sacramento Kings page, give Matt George a recommendation in the comments down below on this episode. He'll have it posted there as well. So we talked a little bit about De'Aaron Fox earlier and how he had that one bad game, but he historically does pretty well against New Orleans. How is he going to how do you think he's approaching this game? What do you expect from him in this one? Because certainly the Pelicans are going to be putting Herb Jones on him. They have Dyson Daniels in reserves there too. And I think they're really going to try and kind of be disruptful of him and press that point of attack and kind of follow that blueprint that worked in that game where he scored just 3 points.
The best version of the Sacramento Kings is sharing the wealth. The best version of the Kings is having 2 to 3 20-point scores or 6 double-digit scores, winning by committee on offense while defensively having the tone set and playing with physicality 1 through 5, right? So if De'Aaron Fox has to go for 40, he can do that. But I would argue that that's not necessarily the best version of the Kings. If De'Aaron Fox has to go for 40, that probably means that somebody else is struggling. Now, it also could mean De'Aaron is so hot that night that, hey, just keep feeding him the ball and let him take you the rest of the way, or live or die by De'Aaron Fox, right? So he's more than capable of that. What De'Aaron did very, very well against the Warriors is he got to his spots. And one of his favorite spots on the floor is the elbow jumper, right? Just uses that burst of speed on the perimeter to get by a man, or if you play off of him because you don't want him to beat you to the rim, he'll just take a few steps in and pull up at that free throw line or that corner of the paint jumper. And he tends to knock that down at a pretty high clip. So he kind of established himself offensively with that. Issues that De'Aaron has had this season that I think he's gone away from now that the games have more significance to them. He's added the 3-point shot to his game, which has made him a unguardable 3-level scorer. But sometimes he's been over-reliant on that 3-point shot to where he hasn't been getting downhill and getting to the rim and getting paint touches, which is a pillar of Mike Brown's offense in Sacramento. So if you can get De'Aaron to shoot a high volume of threes, you're doing a good job. But most of the time, it's not what defenses are forcing De'Aaron to do necessarily. It's De'Aaron choosing to do that because in his mind, attacking the basket or going into the paint isn't worth it. So the more you can keep De'Aaron Fox out of the paint, even if he's not necessarily scoring at the rim, the better it's going to be for you. I just don't know if in a game this meaningful with so much on the line, when Fox is in a I'm going to give it everything I got mode, that there's really anything the Pelicans can do. And I mean that respectfully. I just thought there's nothing the Warriors could do to stop De'Aaron to get it from his spots.
Yeah, in Herb Jones has had a bit of a weird whistle this year, one of the premier defenders in the NBA, but he's been in foul trouble, the past month for the Pelicans early on, and that really limits what he can do, and he can't be as aggressive when that's the case, right? So when we look at that kind of matchup between him versus De'Aaron Fox, if Fox is driving over and over and over again and Herb Jones gets in a little bit of foul trouble, that really opens up the paint for him to be aggressive, to attack and do all of those things that you were just talking about. And given how it's gone for Herb Jones, that's a big concern I have when it comes to this game. What about looking at the matchup between Jonas Valanciunas and Domantas Sabonis? Sabonis has been good against New Orleans this season, but Valanciunas seems to at least hold his own in this one. What are you expecting there?
I mean, I'm two giants just slugging it out. I love watching them play. Now, I think this matchup, this is weird to say. Domantas Sabonis is the better player.
Yes.
Domantas Sabonis is probably going to put up better numbers. But in that, the same can be true while also saying that I think this matchup is it's better for Valanciunas because the type of player that he is, the physicality that he likes to play with, typically Domantas Sabonis not necessarily struggles with. There are times that he's definitely struggled with it, but it definitely disrupts him a little bit compared to how the Golden State Warriors played against him, where they are more kind of back off and let him shoot that mid-range jumper, let him run his DHO game. Sabonis, there were a couple of plays where he tried to post up and went right into the chest of like Draymond Green, who was guarding him, and had some success. And I expect a very physical battle between the two of them. The Pelicans Kings game in Sacramento a couple of weeks ago, Jonas Valanciunas scored like 4 to 6 points in the paint to open up the game. So he was in attack mindset mode as well, trying to at least establish himself down low a little bit with Ingram's absence, which I appreciated. I don't know. You got two guys that know each other very, very, very well. Who play
teammates, right?
International teammates who play very hard and very physical. I'm very interested to see how the officials treat them. In my opinion, just let them go. Like, let them go. Unless guys are getting punched and hit in the face, which Sabonis gets hit in the face a lot, but I'm not suggesting Valanciunas is intentionally doing that. Like, let them battle. And may the best big win at that point. So I think it's a very intriguing matchup that the Pelicans should feel pretty good about, even if Sabonis is on paper and eye test says Sabonis is the better player. Valanciunas is a beast.
Yeah, I think they're going to try and get him the ball a little bit early on. They want to get CJ and Brandon Ingram going, but if that's not falling, right, like I expect them to post up JV and to toss him the ball and see if he can cook Sabonis a little bit. If he can score a little bit, right, the key for Jonas Valanciunas and how he fits into the Pelicans offense is if he starts drawing double teams, and that will kill an opponent, right? If he is playing really physical with Sabonis and they need to throw some help defense down there, someone's open. And that means one of Brandon Ingram, CJ McCollum, or Trey Murphy is going to be open at that point in time. And all the Pelicans need to do then is just move the ball around. And Jonas Valanciunas is a very good passer. That's one of those things that if he gets doubled, and I don't know if the Kings will do that, right? We've seen some teams do it, and then some teams realize like we should not do that at all. We should stay home on CJ and Brandon Ingram. They can open up the game that way for the Pelicans. The offense can flow, and I feel really good about Ingram having a good game, CJ having a good game. And it might come down to if they just feed JV enough early on in this one to kind of force that to happen.
Yeah, I would be pretty surprised, to be honest with you, if the Kings threw any doubles at Valanciunas.
No, that's good to know, right?
Because even if the physicality, let's talk about Sabonis getting into foul trouble, right? Let's say this game is physical and Sabonis picks up 2 quick fouls in the first couple minutes of the game. That's going to have a drastic offense on the Sacramento, or impact on the Sacramento Kings offense negatively for sure. But defensively, the Kings go right to Alex Len, another big physical guy who's going to come in and be like, all right, I'll play physical against you too, Jonas. So I don't expect the Kings to, like, if Jonas Valanciunas beats the Kings, then that's where Sacramento just goes, respect.
Yeah, you just shrug and go, we had a good game plan, right? And the result wasn't what we wanted. But if you do that, in a 10-game series, right, you win more than you lose. Yeah,
the Kings just cannot afford to be leaving CJ on the perimeter like they've done and giving him so many good looks to get going. And then Brandon Ingram, especially in the mid-range, can just torch Sacramento. So I think the Kings are going to be wholeheartedly set on limiting those two guys as much as possible. And if Trey Matthews, who hit like 6 threes, Trey Murphy.
He's capable of doing it.
He did that in Sacramento. I don't know why I said Trey Matthews. Trey Murphy hit 6 threes in Sacramento the other day. If he kills you on the perimeter, tip your cap. Jose Alvarado kills you, tip your cap. Like, that's just a team with depth beating you in a big game. It sucks. It's hard to deal with, but it's also like, respect. That's a team game.
Yeah, well, we'll find out. I think it's going to be a close matchup. Yeah, Zion Williamson not playing is a big, big, big blow to New Orleans, but there's still a lot of talent here. These teams have had a lot of history this season so far, and I think we're all excited for this game. Do or die. That's kind of what we live for on a Friday night. Cancel your weekend plans because you got to watch this game here instead. And that's going to do it for the crossover episode of Locked On Pelicans, Locked On Kings. I'm Jake Madison. He's Matt George. We appreciate y'all hanging out with us for this episode. episode here. Please, if you're a Pelicans fan, go give Matt George a restaurant recommendation here over on the Locked On Kings YouTube. And we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I know we'll be back either this weekend or on Monday on our respective channels to talk about this one and what it means for the futures of these teams.
Light the beam.